your third lesson on listening part, and first, as usual, we will talk about the vocabulary. And the topic for today is education and student life. Of course, I think that we all have to know some words that are less common, of course, describing our student life, educational background, for example, the speaking part. At the same time, we need some words and collocations when writing down essays, because, of course, I think that education is very close to everybody. Once you are watching this, of course, definitely you are a student or you are a recent graduate of university, and everywhere we have to know how to describe education and student life, right? Especially this is a very common topic in essays, in writing part 2. That's why let's try to diversify a little bit our vocabulary, our lexical resource in this part, in this topic, education and student life. So let's get started in this case. So the first word, the first collocation even I would say, is to secure a place. To secure a place actually can be used, for example, when you can write down your motivation letter to a university or college. For example, good marks at the high school secured me a place at the prestigious university. Or, for example, you can say that I practiced a lot before passing my IELTS exam because I wanted to get a high score in order to secure a place at the university I really would like to apply to. Next word, again, next collocation I even would say is seat of learning. Very often we have to use this word like university or college or educational institutions, but I think those are the only words that we generally use describing kind of places, right, where we enter after school. But at the same time, you as well can use this word seat of learning. Just generally it is the place where people study, whether it can be school or college or university. For example, you can say that governments try to provide as many seats of learning for the people of the country as possible. Or you can say that my university is one of the best seats of learning in the country. So at the same time, I think that this is the word that is more related to the academic language, I would say. It's more relevant in your essays, for example, in writing part 2. That's why you are really welcome to use this in your essays. Next word is distinguished, outstanding, prominent, and these are the synonyms that you actually can use when describing some scholars or scientists or professors, for example, right? You cannot just say simply like best or good teachers or professors or scholars, right? We very often use such kind of words like outstanding, as I told you already, and especially the word prominent, that is very good in order to describe people who are well respected, for example, for all the achievements in the academia, in their career. And especially, yes, if you are referring to professors, to those who work in the sphere of education, right, we very often use this word distinguished, outstanding, prominent, instead of just successful or good or best. So the next word is thirst for knowledge, and I think that this is very positive again when writing down your motivation letters. This is, I even would say, kind of cliche maybe, but you are still welcome to use this, for example, again when you write your essays, right? You can say that maybe, let's just have an example, like an example. You can say that Chinese students, they are well known across the world for their thirst for knowledge, or for their exceptional thirst for knowledge. They are all strive to achieve, they all strive to get good marks, for example, to become experts in their fields. At the same time, you can say that, or you can say that fortunately, unfortunately, only those who have this real thirst for knowledge may succeed in their career or in their study. Generally, you can use this word in order to describe this will or desire to learn, to know, to investigate. So this is actually a very positive attitude towards study. So the next word is, I would say, rather spoken. It's room for improvement. It's again, you see, collocation. You can use it actually everywhere, not only in education, not only describing education, for example, right, or student life, but very often, for example, teachers use this when, let's say, checking or revising essays or homeworks. And you can say that while checking my homework, the teachers usually told me that there was a room for improvement, right? That there were some places, some sites, some points where I had to work a little bit more intensively in order to get a good mark, we can say that usual professors advise us to investigate more thoroughly, more deeply in order to, for example, gain advance in your research. That's why I all the time say that yes, there is kind of room for improvement in my research. There is still something to do, okay? That's why you generally, as you see, can use this everywhere in absolutely different spheres and different situations, but it is rather spoken, I would say. So the next word is to play truant, and I think it's very common, especially for school students. You probably already have heard the word truancy or to play truant, right? These are like nouns and verb. For example, one day you simply can be absent at school, and you do not have any reasonable explanation for this. So in this case, of course, you definitely play truant, or in this case I can say that there is the fact of truancy, so you just still do not want to attend the classes as you are supposed to. And again, as I told you, there is no any excuse for this, right? So this is your fault, this is your responsibility once you do not go to the classes, to the lectures, whether it is school or university. So next, first-hand knowledge is the word that very often is used while, for example, describing your researches or the work that you do on your own. For example, you can say that while investigating people's motivation as a part of my research work on sociology, I try to get or receive only first-hand knowledge or first-hand information. The sources that you just gain yourself, and this is generally, I would say, very close to primary resources, right? This is something that you just get on your own. For example, you really interview people, you get their opinion, then you analyze it, then you put it on paper, right? And this is actually the way you created these new ideas, you created this information, this source, this knowledge. So in this case, yeah, we usually use this word like first-hand knowledge. That's why I can say that my research work was highly evaluated by professors, by all the teaching staff, because of the presence of some kind of first-hand information, or because of the first-hand knowledge that the research provided. Okay? Or you can say that I do not prefer to read the information that was already analyzed by someone, so that's why I try, of course, only to get first-hand knowledge, for example, by asking directly the professors or only by reading their works instead of just reading some secondary resources. So got it, right? Like primary resources, primary knowledge, first-hand knowledge, those are all synonyms. Next word is to back up. To back up, I think that even because of this collocation, you might guess the meaning, right? We very often again can use this while describing our background, like general background in terms of career, in terms of education. You again can use this while trying to write down a motivational letter. For example, you can say that 1 year of internship back up my skills in IT, maybe, or you can say that 2-month internship back up my knowledge and practical skills in digital marketing. So in this case, you see that it actually helped to develop some skills. And usually we very often use this while describing some practical skills rather than knowledge perhaps, right? So this is something that really helped you to advance with its career, with its some kind of knowledge that will be helpful in your further development as a professional, as a scholar, I don't know, as a teacher, as whoever you are. So next. To marshal the facts is actually the word that, again, many students use, for example, while doing the research papers. They can use this word. For example, actually it means to analyze, to arrange the data, the information that you, for example, find out on the internet. But at the same time, this means just to present the information logically, right, in the correct order. For example, you can say that I found different resources or a bulk of information on the internet related to my topic of the research. But then, of course, I've realized that I still need to marshal the facts. And this is the most difficult part while writing down a proper essay or proper research or proper, like any kind of scientific work, because, of course, you have to arrange the information, to sift the information, to get rid of some unnecessary facts, right? So that's why, yeah, we very often use this, like, For example, scholars before presenting their papers have to work intensively while marshalling their facts that they have already received from some other primary or secondary sources. So the next word is to be sidetracked. We very often use this in passive form, I would say, because we usually can use this in such kind of sentences. So to be sidetracked means to be a little bit behind than others. For example, you can say that if a person does not prefer to enter a university just after school, there is still a risk that this person can be definitely sidetracked from the peers, from people of his or her own age. For example, those already will advance, will develop, right? For example, being in the first or second or third year of study, and you are still working, thinking about your future degree, and of course, in terms of your academic progress, you can be sidetracked. For example, you can say that once I did not attend school for the last 2 months, of course, I really felt that I was sidetracked from other classmates. So you definitely miss some important facts. There is kind of gap that you still have and others do not. So others are already somewhere ahead and you're a little bit behind. So in this case, you are sidetracked. Yeah, very often we use this, for example, in relation to universities or colleges or schools. I think that you are quite familiar already with the next collocation, that is keen interest. We very often use this, for example, when you want to say that I'm quite good at math, and you at the same time can say that I have a keen interest, but in this case you will say in math, I have a keen interest in philosophy, I have a keen interest in literature, right? Of course, we very often can say that I'm good at literature, right? But at the same time, you want to say that I have really true interest in philosophy or literature. In this case, you can use this keen interest, okay? Next is comprehensive education. This means that, for example, government provides education for everybody in the country. There is no such kind of exclusive education, right? Generally, all the population is provided by educational services from the side of the government. So in this case, people or children of this country actually are provided with primary education, secondary education, higher education, right? And this actually grasps many fields, many subjects, many programs. So in this case, you can say that the government or this country definitely has this comprehensive education. Or you can say that, for example, comprehensive education took place maybe several decades ago in most of the countries in the world, as far as before education was considered as something that was that only the elite could afford, right? So this was quite exclusive. So this was not very accessible to all the population. In this case, we can say that now education is definitely comprehensive. Well-endowed. We very often use this, for example, again, with universities, schools, maybe some other institutions, some other establishments, when we want to say that everything is provided. For example, you can say that more and more well-endowed universities open in my country. That means definitely some improvements in the sphere of education. So this means that all those universities are provided with laboratories, maybe with the staff, with definitely some study materials, right? So in this case, you can say that government has definitely interest in improving education in the country, because all the schools and colleges now are well-endowed, like well provided with everything. So next, so very often we need to use this word like to get knowledge, right? But at the same time, to get knowledge is quite simple, I would say. Instead of this, you actually can use such kind of words like to absorb knowledge, to acquire knowledge, and to assimilate. So to assimilate, to absorb, and to acquire actually all are synonyms, and you can simply use them instead of just get knowledge, because in your essays, the word like to get knowledge or to have knowledge is not very correct, I would say, in terms of your academic language. So that's why please use those words. For example, you can say that 4 years at universities gave me a great chance to acquire the knowledge that I hardly could get, for example, anywhere else. So in this case means that this is the way you actually got knowledge, right? Actually, that's it, right? Of course, so we know that there are plenty of words, right? Some of them you still can see on your paper, right? I just gave some examples with the most useful collocations, and you can simply use them whether it's spoken language, academic language, I mean whether it's written language, but please use those words appropriately. So now we are finally moving to the listening part itself. For today, I've prepared some interesting cases where definitely many students have mistakes, and we will try to avoid them. Sometimes some recordings can be played quite fast, and we still have to recognize some words and collocations just to write down the correct answer. Some cases, some listening tasks still will have such kind of tricky questions, and again we will try to learn how to cope with them. And actually this is the last lesson on the list, because as I told you already, once you know the strategies, once you know the approaches, the rest of your work is just practice, practice, practice again, right? So I really would be happy to know that you apply all the knowledge from these 3 lessons afterwards while doing your practice tests on listening, because otherwise I think that it's quite not very useful to start listening part without those strategies that we have covered, and still of course we will continue during this class. So now let's get started. So now even if the first page looks quite different, you see that the first task is multiple choice. Actually this is the handout from IELTS practice materials. So you see that the first section 1, questions 1-6 are going to be skipped, as far as the questions here are considered a little bit easy, I would say, so you can complete this at home. Those questions 1-6 can be easily done at home. So now I really would like you to go further a little bit. So you see that we are scrolling down to questions 7-10, and here we have the task complete the sentences below. What I really would like to highlight is that we have to write down the words, in this case, in the spaces, in the correct way. So now, of course, as usual, let's try to predict. Of course, we have to pay attention to the word limit. So first you see that the woman has visited the art center, so definitely it has to be a noun, as far as it definitely can be 10 times maybe, or 20 times in total, right? So yeah, we will write down a number here. Next, 8. The first event at the art center the woman went to was. So of course we will write down this event. Maybe it can be some kind of show. So we will see, of course. What you have to write down here is just the name of the event, right, or the type of the event, right? Next, the woman was unaware, or the woman didn't know there was something at the art center. Of course, here we have to write down noun. Maybe it can be some kind of room, or maybe this kind of hall, and she didn't know about it. And the next one is the woman likes the idea of. For example, the woman likes the idea of celebration, I don't know, or maybe the woman likes the idea of a concert or something like this, right? Again, it can be an item, it can be as well, for example, the event. So now let's see. I think that the prediction in this case was very easy. So now let's listen to the conversation, I think, this case.
Listen and answer questions 7-10.
While you're here, we're actually conducting a short survey of people who phone up the Art Centre. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? It'll only take a couple of minutes.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks a lot. So, how many times have you visited Laverton Art Centre in the last 6 months?
Well, I've only lived in the area for the last 4 months, so not that many times. 3, I suppose. Yes, that's right.
Fine.
So in this case, I think that it was clear, right? That you have just only to write down 3, I suppose. That's it. Next.
And how did you first find out about the Art Centre?
Let me think. Oh yes, a friend invited me to a concert and I came with her.
Have you ever seen a film?
So in this case, right, of course, a friend invited me to a concert, right? So please here pay attention that once you have written the word concert, it is considered as a mistake, because the correct word in this case, the correct option, I would say, is a concert, because she says that a friend invited me to a concert. That's why we have to write down a concert. Do you remember I told you that once we complete the sentences, of course, first you have to So do you remember I told you that once we have to complete the sentences, we have to write down the words in a grammatically correct way. So if she said that a friend invited me to a concert, let's listen to this again.
And how did you first find out about the art centre?
Let me think. Oh, yes, a friend invited me to a concert.
You see, to a concert definitely was said. In this case, of course, you have to write down this "e" because we are completing the sentences. And we cannot, of course, change the word order and we cannot change anything at all in the sentence. So please write down the full version, like a concert, okay?
And I came with her.
Have you ever seen a film at the Arts Cinema here?
No, I haven't, to be honest. In fact, until you mentioned it earlier, I didn't realize you even had a cinema.
So you see that I didn't realize you even had a cinema, right? So she says that I didn't realize there was, or that you had a cinema, something like this, right? And you see that even if this a cinema is not that clear, of course you still have to write down. Of course they will not say like you had a cinema, but you have to spot this, you have to catch this, right? Like you had a cinema. Let's listen to this again.
No, I haven't, to be honest. In fact, until you mentioned it earlier, I didn't realize you even had a cinema.
Had a cinema. Of course in this case you as well have to write down the correct version, that is a cinema, not just cinema. And next one.
One more question. If we offered a free tour of the art centre, including things such as going backstage to look at the dressing rooms, would you be interested in going on it?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think a tour like that would be very interesting. I'd even pay for it.
That's great. Thank you very much for your time.
So now I'm really interested in what you actually have written down in this case, right? Because there are two options. Let's listen to this again once more.
If we offered a free tour of the art centre...
So first I think about a free tour, for example, right? What I hear at least, because this is something that is quite similar to what I expect in this space, right? And next option is...
including things such as going backstage to look at the dressing rooms. Would you be interested in going on it?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think a tour like that would be very interesting.
And then she says, yes, definitely. I think a tour like this will be good, let's say, right? So definitely she wants to show that she really would like the idea of this tour. Of course, we cannot write down a free tour for two reasons. First, of course, I cannot write down because here is the word limit of 2 words, let's say, and of course I cannot write down a free tour. But the main the main reason is that here the word a free tour was mentioned in the question. For example, let's listen to this again once more.
No, I haven't, to be honest.
If we offered a free tour of the art centre, including things such as going backstage to look at the dressing rooms, would you be interested?
So you see that this is actually a question, would you be interested in going to this free tour? And of course we, in this case, we still don't know whether she really likes or doesn't like the idea of a free tour. And only when she really approves and when she actually says that yes, in this case, of course, we can consider that this sentence starting with this yes is the same as this sentence that is numbered like 10th question, the woman likes the idea of. And only in this case we have to write down something that she really approves. And in this case she actually mentions the word a tour like this would be fine or would be good. Let's listen to this.
On it.
Oh yes, definitely. I think a tour like that would be very interesting.
So you see that only a tour in this case can be written, not a free tour, not free tour, not anything else, but only a tour. So in this case you see that the main mistake perhaps for most of the students could be this A, because some students really do not pay attention to this A, and some students do not even realize that you have to write down this A. Please, once you complete the sentences, write down without any changes, okay? Fine. We have to go on, and we are scrolling down to the next page. This is section 2. As you see, actually, this book does not contain many materials, many tasks, so you see that every page On every page we have around 10 questions. So in this case we actually will work with all questions on this page exactly, as far as the exercises are very interesting, a little bit complicated. So now first let's try to work with this section 2 and with questions number 1 and 6. So you have to write down the correct questions. As you see, it is question type of question, in fact. So we have to write down no more than 3 words and or a number. But first, of course, we have to understand actually what is required to write down in this case, right? So now again, let's try to predict at least, right? So this is an old one. Again, write no more than 3 words, okay? How long has Sport Aid existed for? Of course, I think that it's easy, right? Like you can write down a number like 1 year or 2 years or 1 month and so on. Who does Sport Aid mainly benefit? Like who receives help or assistance from this Sport Aid? So in this case, it can be any organization. It can be, for example, maybe community of some people. It can be a group of people. I don't know. So it can be some kind of group, definitely, right? Of course, it can be an organization, as I told you already. So now, maybe it can be country, maybe it can be city. Next, what did the money provide for one village? So in this case, I think that it has to be something about infrastructure. So perhaps it can be some facilities. Of course, you can guess from the meaning of the question itself, right? Next, we have here what is thought to be an important part of development. In this case, please pay attention to this. What is thought to be an important part of the development? Of course, in this case, we cannot predict, right? As far as it is a little bit difficult, right? We have to write down, or we have to expect something like noun, perhaps. But we in this case have to be really careful with this word. That is very important part of development. Where is the main event taking place? Of course, this is just the place, right? It can be the city center or something like this. And next, the 6th one is what are you advised to wear to the event? Of course, this is kind of some clothes, of course, right? We will see. So now let's try to actually listen to, but please be prepared as far as this conversation. I would say that this is the monologue even. It's very fast. Of course, in this case, I really would like you to listen to the monologue yourself. I will not write down any answers here, so that I really would like to check whether, for example, the speed is normal for you. So that's why I really would like you to be able to go from one question, for example, to second question and third questions, so that you will really be able to write down all the notes that you have to, for example, right? So that I really would like to see whether, for example, the speed is normal for you or not. Of course, I cannot say that absolutely all conversations and recordings are as fast as this one, but you have to be prepared, as far as this is a very perfect example of how this conversation or the monologue can be very fast. So please be careful in this case, be prepared.
You'll hear a woman talking on the radio about...
In this case, I'll only point where we are right now. For example, once the recording will be played on, once the recording will be played, I will just show where we are and where you have to move. But please, you have to write down your answers on your own. In this case...
Hello, you're listening to Redgate Radio and I'm Alex Dunbar. As you may know, people in the city will be taking part in Sport Aid this weekend. Here's Liz to tell us more about this event and how you can get involved.
Thanks, Alex. Well, this is the 4th year of Sport Aid, and it looks like it's going to be bigger and better than ever. Sport Aid is organised by the City Council, and it supports a number of different charities, although the main reason for its existence is to raise money to help developing countries. Last year, it raised over £100,000, and that money has helped to make life a little easier for people in many parts of the world. Just to give you one example, the village of Otunga in Chad now has a water supply, meaning that the people no longer have to walk miles every day just to get water. And there are countless stories like that. By contributing to the infrastructure of different regions, it's hoped that things like Sport Aid will enable many more people to climb out of poverty. Another way in which that happens is by giving people the knowledge and skills to earn money. One of the biggest issues facing people in many poorer areas of the world is education. something that we take so much for granted, can be rare and expensive in some regions. Education is seen as key to development, and money from Sport Aid has paid for schoolrooms and equipment in a number of places. So what can you do to help? There are lots of ways in which you can get involved. First of all, you can go down to the biggest attraction of the day, the Sport Aid charity football match. There will be thousands of people at City Stadium, and all the money raised from the sale of tickets goes to charity. There's much more going on than just a football match, of course. There will also be lots of entertainment for the whole family, including a fair, stalls selling all kinds of food, and even a chance to try out some sports you may not have tried before, like softball and volleyball. It's probably going to be a very active day, so it's best to make sure that everyone is in comfortable clothes before you go down there. It's always a fantastic day out.
So now I think that you realize that in fact it was very fast. So now let's compare your answers with my answers in this case, right? So what I've heard in the first part was that this is the 4th year. So actually she does not say that that Sport Aid existed for 4 years, right? She says only like this. Let's listen to this.
Thanks, Alex. Well, this is the 4th year of Sport Aid.
So you see that this is the 4th year. So in this case, once she mentions this 4th year, you have to write down in correct way as far as we are answering this formulation, this question exactly. How long has Sport Aid existed for? And you in this case only have to write down 4 years. She mentioned, even if she said it is the 4th year. Of course, you see that the grammatical structure, of course, is different, right? Next.
Bigger and better than ever. Sport Aid is organised by the City Council, and it supports a number of different charities.
So in this case, probably you wrote something like it supports different charities. Of course, because you see that if it benefits, for example, some charities, you also can say that it supports different charities, right? Actually, it's not correct in this case because you see that there is the word mainly. And there was nothing connected to charities as mainly, of course, right? So now let's try to listen to this, and of course there will be the second part of this sentence that we have actually to catch.
Although the main reason
So you see that the main reason
for its existence is to raise money to help developing countries.
to raise money for developing countries. You see that, to raise money for developing countries. And this was given with this word, although the main reason. Only in this case, I can consider that this is the correct answer in this case, because you see that the main reason was to raise money for developing countries. So that's why, answering the question, who does Sport Aid mainly benefit, we will write down developing countries. Got it, right? Next.
Last year, it raised over £100,000, and that money has helped to make life a little easier for people in many parts of the world.
So you see that now we're approaching this question because they mention about many parts of the world, so that afterwards perhaps the next case will be with this one village, right?
Just to give you one example, the village of Otunga in Chad now has a water supply.
So this village, I don't understand really the name of this village, right? But this village now has a water supply. Again, they didn't say directly like the money provided water supply for one village, right? They say that now this village has water supply, of course. That's why you'll write down water supply.
Meaning that the people no longer have to walk miles every day just to get water. And there are countless stories like that. By contributing to the infrastructure of different regions, it's hoped that things like Sport Aid will enable many more people to climb out of poverty.
So you see that even if this sentence seems to be quite similar to this one, of course, right? We do not hear anything about development. We do not see anything about this important part, right? So now let's continue listening to this.
Another way in which that happens is by giving people the knowledge and skills to earn money.
Again, some words like knowledge, skills were given, right? But nothing about this importance, right? So now this is not that sentence. You still have to continue and listen to the rest of the conversation.
One of the biggest issues facing people in many poorer areas of the world is education. something that we take so much for granted, can be rare and expensive in some regions. Education is seen as key to development.
So you see that only now education is seen as a key to development. So only in this case I really see that yes, in fact, this is important part and this is key. These are two very similar words. Yeah, that's why I only now can write down this education. Education is key, education is important, right? Next.
And money from Sport Aid has paid for schoolrooms and equipment in a number of places. So what can you do to help? There are lots of ways in which you can get involved. First of all, you can go down to the biggest attraction of the day, the Sport Aid charity football match.
So in this case, I don't know why really, but many students write down this football match, right? But you have to write down the place. Where is the main event taking place? Where is this football match taking place, okay? Not football match, definitely.
There will be thousands of people at City Stadium.
So in this case, you of course have to write down City Stadium, but please be aware of the way you write. City Stadium has to be written in such a way because of course this is its name. For example, Kazakh Medical University, of course we understand that this is its name, right? So in this case, City Stadium does not mean that this is, for example, just the stadium that is located in the city, right? This is its name. Like we also can say that Central Stadium, right? And of course we write down in such a way with big letters, Central Stadium. So that's why of course be aware of the way you write. Okay, next. And I think the last one of course was very easy.
And all the money raised from the sale of tickets goes to charity. There's much more going on than just a football match, of course. There will also be lots of entertainment for the whole family, including a fair, stalls selling all kinds of food, and even a chance to try out some sports you may not have tried before, like softball and volleyball. It's probably going to be a very active day, so it's best to make sure that everyone is in comfortable clothes.
So in this case, I think that this comfortable cloth was very easy, was very clear to you perhaps, right? But it was just only very fast. This is the only problem actually with this task, I think, right? So in this case, of course, I really would like you now to be able to cope with such kind of very fast tasks. And in this case, of course, you have to again pay attention to, as I told you already, that very sentence, of course. So those words, those special keywords that you see, for example, as not very important, like mainly, for example, important part. Yeah, of course, you see that they actually help to see and to get actually that very sentence. Now, as you see, we have still questions 7 and 10, and we are going to the multiple choice. Here, as usual, as before, I again will try to explain how we have to exclude the wrong answers. As far as I told you already in this choose the correct letter type of question or multiple choice type of question, as you see, we have here the options, right? The main task is not only to, for example, get the right answer, as far as it sometimes can be really difficult, of course, but you also have to have the skill of excluding the wrong answers, as far as those wrong options as well will be mentioned. So we will try in this case see how they exclude, and afterwards, of course, we will try to tick the right option. So now let's get started. Let's go through these questions very quickly. You can learn more about different events by contacting the radio station, the town hall, the organizers. The council is more likely to approve. Pay attention to this. More likely with unusual events, expensive events, or familiar sports. Next, what do you need to provide if you organize your own event? And the last one, who is able to organize events? Anybody, local residents only, adults only. So again, I would like to remind you that even if those questions might look quite simple, in fact, this confusion appears, of course, when they try to mention just everything, every of these ABC options, and then afterwards you cannot really understand what's the correct and what's wrong answer. As usual, we write so that we will understand what exactly they mean, mentioning every of these options.
Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Apart from the main event, there are a large number of smaller events taking place across the city. These range from fun runs around the park to games of cricket, and there's sure to be something happening in your area. Contact details are available for the people putting together each event, and you can get those from the council website. We'll be giving you the address for that at the end of the program. It's still not too late to organise.
So let's try to work with this one, right? So we'll give you this one, she says, right? So contact details are available, she says, and you can get it from the council website. And even if you might think that something administrative has to be connected somehow with council, and you might think about this town hall, of course you are not supposed to think like this, because she says that we will give you. In this case, of course, what is meant by the word we, I think, is the word organizers, as far as this is the speech of one of the organizers. As far as she actually explains the event, right, and the way you organize it. So of course in this case, pay attention to this one. So I think that the correct answer will be C in this case. Let's see, maybe they will mention something about this radio or town hall, but maybe not.
As your own event, as lots of people around the city are, although you'll have to get going on it now. First of all, do check that there isn't a similar event in your area. And
so you see that we actually are moving to the next question, right? So in this case, even if they mention this correct option by the word we, and you have to write down organizers as the correct answer, of course you can expect that they will mention something about radio and town hall just to exclude this, to show that these are the wrong answers. But sometimes, of course, they do not show them, right? They only mention this correct answer. So now we are moving to this 8. Let's start from the very beginning.
It's still not too late to organize your own event.
So you see that this is where we actually speak about your own event, right? Аружан, ты можешь тихо двигаться? Подожди, нельзя, да? Нет, нельзя. Почему? Сейчас, подожди, дай запишу. Странно.
As lots of people around the city are.
So here we actually start speaking about the organization of your own event, and of course we have to approve it. So get prepared for this question number 8.
Although you'll have to get going on it now. First of all, do check that there isn't a similar event in your area, and then call the town hall to register your event. The local council needs to approve all events, and you'll stand more chance if you can come up with a sport that's new to some people, rather than just another game of football.
So you see that, yeah, she says that it has to be not a similar event, but something new. You get more chance. Council is more likely to approve, right? So there's more likely to approve, and more chance, of course, are synonyms, right? And that's why we cannot write down expensive events, of course. We cannot write down familiar sports, as far as the condition was that it shouldn't be any similar event. So that's why we can say that new is quite similar to this unusual, of course. So that's why the correct answer is A in this case. Next, what do you need to provide if you organize your own event? In this case, actually, they will mention, as far as I remember, everything. Equipment, prices, publicity, all will be mentioned. But pay attention to the way they actually mention this, right? The way they exclude some options and the way they approve some options.
Use your imagination, or try the internet to get some ideas. Try to come up with something that's going to get lots of people along, and which will raise money. You might not want to go for anything that turns out to be too costly though, since the council isn't able to supply bats or balls or anything else you need, but they will give you advice on finding a good location, and might even be able to help you out with small prizes for winners, as well as making sure that everyone knows about your event by publicising it on the website and sending you an organisers pack with lots more information. There are a couple more.
So you see that she actually first mentions about this council. It was quite a tricky thing, as far as they did not mention what you need to provide if you organize your own event. They focus on the council rather. So that council will help you with location. Let's listen to this one again.
You might not want to go for anything that turns out to be too costly though, since the council isn't able to supply bats or balls or anything else you need.
And you see that council is not going to supply, like cannot supply, for example, boats or something like this. So definitely the council cannot supply boats, right, or some other equipments.
But they will give you advice on finding a good location.
So they will help with location.
and might even be able to help you out with small prizes for winners, as well
You see, they will also help with prizes.
as making sure that everyone knows about your event by publicising it on the website.
And they will also publicize. So you see that they actually excluded those options like prices and publicity, as far as this is something that council is going to help you with. About the equipment, of course, she didn't say that this is your task, that you have to provide it. But she says that council will not give you any bots or anything else. So in this case, of course, we assume that this equipment is your task, is something that you have to provide. So in this case, you see that once we can exclude the wrong answers, we can actually get the right answer, that is A in this case. So next.
And sending you an organiser's pack with lots more information. There are a couple more things you need to be aware of for your event. There aren't any age restrictions. Although, if you're under 18, you'll need to get an adult, such as a parent, to sign the forms for you and to handle any money raised. But you do need to live in the Red Gate area. You should also be prepared for anyone to turn up, since all events are public.
So you see, yeah, she actually mentions about those restrictions, right? There are no restrictions, she says, who is able to organize events. There are no restrictions, but if you are under 18, you have to have something like sign from your parents, right? She says. So that's why, of course, I cannot write down that adults only, because children, if you are under 18, still can participate, still can organize, but only with this permission of parents. So that's why, of course, C cannot be given, right, as far as adults, and the children, as you can hear from the answer, can participate. So next, you are not supposed to live in Red Gate area. So of course, that's why we cannot, of course, say that it's anybody, because there is still one restriction. You are not supposed to live in Red Gate area. Even if we do not understand whether this means local or maybe not local, but anyways, this is something that is connected to location, right? So that's why I assume, I think, I guess that it perhaps is B. The correct answer is B. Let's listen to this once more.
You need to be aware of for your event. There aren't any age restrictions. Although, if you're under 18, you'll need to get an adult, such as a parent, to sign the forms for you and to handle any money raised. But you do
So we, of course, exclude the C.
need to live in the Red Gate area.
But you don't need to live in Red Gate area. So that's why, of course, we think, or we can guess at least, that this can be B. Of course, otherwise it will be really difficult to me, even like to teachers, to write down the correct answer, as far as this all is very confusing, I should say, right? And you can see that this monologue is actually quite fast. So that's why, please try to cope with this note taking, as I try all the time to write very fast, but afterwards I can, analyze, compare, and then only I try to give the correct answer. Okay, so now we are moving further. So let me see what kind of other exercises do we have in this case. So you see that actually we have, in this case, questions 1-6 that are going to be about the books and the main ideas again, right? Let's try to start. I think that the rest of the exercises, the rest of the exercise you will complete at home. So we will probably do a couple of this task, maybe questions 1, 2, 3, and afterwards the rest of the exercise will be given as a home task, okay?
Unit 3, Exam Practice. Listening. You'll hear a tutor and 2 students discussing modern European writers. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
But in fact, here we are trying to go through those options, right? Let's read this. Well was ill when he wrote this. This was heavily criticized by another author. The predicted limiting the number of people on Earth. This was a commercial unsuccessful novel. This was a talk, not a book. This predicted the type of identity card. This was Wells' only optimistic work. This actually has much longer name. Of course, as far as many things will be quite complicated in this case, I will try to write down as much as I can.
Okay, So, to continue our look at modern European writers who have focused on the future in their work, today we're talking about H.G. Wells. Last week, I asked you both to do some background research on Wells, which we're going to discuss now. Gitanjali, tell us about H.G. Wells.
Right. So, H.G. Wells was a hugely successful British science fiction writer, writing at the end of the 19th and the start of the 20th century, and much of his work focused on predicting the future.
Jason, do you think Wells was just using the future as a narrative device in his fiction?
No. He really believed we can predict the future. In fact, he gave a speech at the Royal Institution in London in 1902 called The Discovery of the Future. And the point he was making was that by looking at what you know about the present and about science, it's quite possible to predict the future.
Indeed. Gitanjali, do you think Wells was always optimistic in his predictions?
Not at all. In fact, he varied in his predictions from being extremely pessimistic about the future to being optimistic. Interestingly, one theory I read links the attitude in Wells's work to his own health. When he was writing The Time Machine, which was published in 1895, he'd just been diagnosed with an incurable fatal disease. Not surprisingly, the book is very pessimistic, being about a dystopia in the future, a long time in the future, the year 802-701 in fact, where there are two races on Earth, the Morlocks and the Eloi, and the Morlocks actually eat the Eloi.
I thought it was interesting, though, that it was H.G. Wells who actually came up with the phrase time machine. So despite being pessimistic, the work has had a lasting effect on our culture.
Right. After The Time Machine, though, H.G. Wells didn't die, of course, and his recovery might be why he began to be a bit more optimistic about the future.
So that brings us to his first utopia, Anticipations. Jason, tell us about that.
Well, Anticipations, or to give it its full title, Anticipations of the Reaction of the Mechanical and Scientific Progress upon Human Life and Scientific Thought, was published in 1901 and was set in the New Republic of the year 2000. Some of the things Wells predicts are fairly close to our reality today, including 24-hour news, global telecommunications, and even a European Union.
We'll come back to the accuracy of...
So you see that actually that's quite enough, right? As far as I again would like to remind you the way we cope with this matching type of questions, right? You see that in fact there were many sentences and many things mentioned about this Wells as a writer, as a philosopher, right? But we are not supposed to write down just everything. Once you only hear the name of the book, for example, only in this case you write down the information that is closely related. And even if I also heard the information about the times when it was published, right? Of course, I did not see anything about, for example, the time, the place where the book was published, right? So that's why I only write down a little bit more appropriate content, right, in this case. So you see that in the first one, they say that he gave a speech that was called The Discovery of the Future. Please write down in this case as far as you first expect the discovery of the future to be mentioned, but they do it in a little bit tricky way as far as they first say that he gave a speech that was called The Discovery of the Future, right? Somewhere at the beginning.
And about science. No. He really believed we can predict the future. In fact, he gave a speech at the Royal Institution in London in 1902 called The Discovery of the Future.
So you
and
see
the point he was making.
So you see that in this case we have to mark this is very important. As far as I see that among those options A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, there was something about like speech, and I think this was this talk, not a book, at the Royal Institution. So in this case I of course can give the correct answer E. Without this the word speech, of course, it would be very difficult to me to recognize actually what they were talking about in this case, right? So next, in the time machine, I think that you all recognize, you all heard that it was about the diagnosis, about this fatal disease, about the fact that he was ill. They also mentioned about some lasting effect on our culture. I just wrote this just in case, as far as I heard, and I tried to catch it. But in fact, I do not see anything like this. I only see the information about illness, right? Like he was ill when he wrote this, right? So in this case, I think it was very easy, and the correct answer is A. And in the third case, anticipations, you also have to write down as you actually hear, as you can catch. So because they say that anticipations ought to give it full title, and you see that. Let's listen to this again once more.
So that brings us to his first utopia, Anticipations. Jason, tell us about that.
Well, Anticipations, or to give it its full title, Anticipations of the Reaction of the Mechanical and Scientific Progress.
Of course, you're not supposed to write down all this. Please do not be panic once you, of course, understand that this is the name of the book, but you cannot write down, as far as we do not have the names of those books, really, like full names, of course. The only thing that you have to write down in this case, that it had really a long title or long name, full title. So in this case, of course, I think that H is close to this one. Yeah, you see? But in fact, apart from this, of course, just in case, because to me, for example, it's really difficult to look through all those options and to keep in mind all those options, right? So that's why just in case I write down about the facts that were mentioned in this book, about the fact that it was close to reality, about news, about telecommunication, about European Union, because of course, what if somewhere in this case I as well can see such kind of things, right? So that's why I try to catch and try to write down as much as possible only if it is really related to this content, right, to this task. Of course, I think that in this case the correct answer is H. So now again, let's go through. Your answers are E, A, and H. In this case, please complete this task at home and we will go further, okay? So in fact, the rest of the exercises will be quite similar, and it's very interesting that there are some tasks about science, about the scientific world, about some researches, encyclopedias, and so on and so forth. Those types of questions for especially listening part 4. As far as here, the texts are very academic, right, and monologues can be quite long and quite sophisticated, so you have to complete those tasks at home. So as you can see, listening section 3, and yeah, here are some exercises with diagrams. We are not going to really focus on this, as far as you had already your exercises with diagrams, right? Of course, you'll find out your recordings in the internet system. We are actually scrolling down, and the next part of this handout I know looks quite different. So we have taken this from IELTS vocabulary book, and you can see that this part of this handout actually starts with sentence completion again. Write no more than one word, but this task as well I leave for a home task, so you have pretty much of the home task, but this is just the revision, I would say, of the previous tasks that we have already done together. So now once you can go further, so you can see that nothing really special is given here. You just only have to write down one word, and the text is quite easy itself, so we are just skipping this. Now let's go to a little bit more difficult task. As far as here, the text will be about the first flights. So you have the task, write no more than 2 words, and of course in this case we have to predict, as far as otherwise it will be, as I told you already, a little bit difficult to understand actually the main meaning. So as usually, I will just write down what I guess. And the same, I think, will work for you. So the Wright brothers flew from the first time. You can see that in 1923, some kind of planes were introduced. So definitely, I think that this is an adjective. Maybe new planes, maybe modern planes, maybe another definition, but another adjective has to be written in this case. So next, planes were owned by the post office, which added something to increase income. Maybe it has to be, of course, noun, it has to be an item, it has to be an object, right? Like added some objects, maybe added some new places to increase income. So next, planes couldn't cross. In this case, of course, you have to write down something. And you can see, so people made part of their journey by train. So people couldn't cross, I don't know, maybe some kind of geographical feature, I think. Like hills maybe, right? They couldn't cross hills, like couldn't fly over hills, so that people made part of the journey by train. Next, Charles Lindbergh flew non-stop from New York. People were emotional on hearing about his. So maybe about his journey, right? Maybe about his expedition, about something. And you see that about his in the French capital. So next, the DC-3 airplane cut costs, but train travels was still cheaper and more. And as far as, of course, we have here more, definitely it as well has to be adjective. For example, cheaper and more suitable, perhaps. Events of the Second World War led to the growth of, for example, I can say the growth of passengers, right? Or maybe the growth of costs, or the growth of prices, right? You can, of course, expect any other word, but from the context, I think that those words, perhaps, definitely, there's are nouns again, right? Next, the developments in the plane design meant better something for travelers. Developments in plane design probably meant better, I don't know, better conditions, let's say. Conditions for travelers. Of course, we will listen to this. Next, only someone or something flew regularly. Maybe some kind of planes, perhaps specific, like special planes, or maybe only, for example, rich people flew regularly, right? So of course it can be something or someone as well. And let's try to predict this one. Airlines were deregulated, so airlines could set their something and something themselves. So set means in this case like to establish. So in this case, so airlines could set their own. For example, I can say that their own rules, right? Maybe, or their own tariffs, or their own prices, maybe themselves as well. So anyways, once I've gone through this task, this exercise, of course now it's easier for me.
Track 16.
This semester, we're going to be looking at the modern aviation industry here in the USA. But today, I'd like to take a look at how it all began. When Orville and Wilbur Wright flew history's first airplane in North Carolina in 1903, the significance of their new invention was of course not yet apparent. 20 years later, by 1923, the first passenger planes did little to change that. The first of these were provided by some of the airmail services.
So you see that, yeah, 1923, it was very clear, right, as far as passenger planes were introduced, right? So you see this link to the date, right?
Flying mail around the country. The U.S. Post Office Department added a few seats for extra revenue, but their planes were noisy.
You see that actually, of course, you hear the word added a few seats, right? But in this case, of course, I cannot write down a few seats as far as I have this word limit of 2 words. So in this case, can I just write down only few seats without this a? In fact, I cannot, as far as a few and few, of course, you know that grammatically are 2 different things, right? So that's why try not to write down anything at all, because just to change a few to just few will not be correct in this case. So we are just only leaving these seats, right? So next.
Cold and uncomfortable. They couldn't fly over mountains, so passengers took trains.
So you see that they couldn't fly over mountains, right? So our prediction was quite correct even, right? Next.
For part of their journey. Another problem was that these planes couldn't carry enough seats to make passenger traffic profitable. So the train was still the way to go. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight captured America's imagination. Lindbergh flew in a small airplane for 33 hours from New York to Paris. Baseball games stopped, and radio announcers wept when his safe arrival in Paris was announced.
So in this case, you see that the formulation is quite tricky, as far as they mention about baseball games that stopped, like something about the crowd. So in these cases, all were just only given in order to show these emotions, And you see that actually only one noun that was mentioned in this case was arrival, right? Let's listen to this.
For 33 hours from New York to Paris. Baseball games stopped, and radio announcers wept when his safe arrival in Paris was announced.
When his safe arrival was announced. In this case, of course, you can write down full formulation, right? Safe arrival. In fact, also, for example, to write down without safe also will be correct. But in order to be sure, please write down at least as you hear. Once safe arrival was given, right? Please let's try to write down at least safe arrival, and anyways it will be correct. So next.
Humans who had always looked to the sky and stars with wonder could now cross vast oceans with amazing speed by taking to the skies. By the late 1930s, the airlines carried mail and passengers from coast to coast. The DC-3, a new airplane with powerful engines and an enclosed cabin, cut the cost of flying in half. It made airlines a profitable business. But at a cost of 5 cents per mile to transport one passenger, air travel was still expensive. Train travel cost only 1.3 cents per
So we are focusing on train, right?
passenger mile and was
cheaper.
still more comfortable.
So you see that, yeah, they mention about this cost. That's why cheaper and more comfortable in this case. I think that it was not that difficult, right? Comfortable. Next.
The average person usually couldn't afford to fly. But a whole class of people, businessmen who put a money value on their time, could afford to fly on company expense accounts. And they did, in soaring numbers. Further developments during World War II sped the development of commercial aviation.
So you see that they say about this World War II, and actually we see the time, right? Sped the development. So that's why Anna said that this is synonym to growth. Yes, of course. So that's why we have to write down sped the development, like marked the development in this case. Marked or sped the development of commercial aviation. Because you see that even if something about soaring numbers you heard previously, it was not connected to this Second World War. So that's why commercial aviation will be the correct answer. Okay, next. So let's listen to this again.
Money value on their time could afford to fly on company expense accounts. And they did, in soaring numbers. Further developments during World War II sped the development of commercial aviation. Military airfields
So got it right in this case. Yeah, as I told you, please do not focus on that soaring numbers, like increasing numbers, okay?
built during the war were afterwards sold to cities which were eager to open their own commercial airports. Airplane manufacturers built new airplanes with pressurized and heated cabins.
So you see that here we actually hear about something in terms of design, right? Like pressurized cabins or something like this. So in this case, of course, we are talking about the design, right? They are talking about the design.
Suddenly, airplanes could fly above bad weather and mountains, where the air and thus the journeys were smoother.
So in this case, you see that they do not even use the word better, but they use the word journeys were smoother. So can I just write down in this case the journeys were smoother? Like journeys were very comfortable, they were very smooth. So that's why they actually use this word smoother in order to show that they were better. And in this case, you see that actually this is synonym, kind of synonym in this case, of course. In the context of this text, it's quite similar. So that's why I have to write down journeys, because those developments in play design meant better journeys for travelers or smoother journeys for travelers. Let's listen to this again once more.
Suddenly, airplanes could fly above bad weather and mountains, where the air and thus the journeys were smoother.
Got it right?
In 1940, 3 million Americans flew. By 1956, 55 million flew.
So you see, you actually want to write down like 55 or 8 million people, right, flew, but we do not have this regularly, right? So that's why we still have to wait to write that very sentence.
In a country with a population of barely 150 million, large numbers of Americans were seeing the world from the air.
So in this case, again, I still cannot write down this. Please wait for this regularly.
By the 1960s, passengers were still mostly business travelers on expense account.
So mostly, can I say, like in most of the cases, right? And passengers mostly, in most of the cases, or regularly were business travelers, I think, right?
By the 1960s, passengers were still mostly business travelers on expense accounts who flew on a regular basis.
Yeah, and actually I have this link to regular basis. In this case, of course, I have to write down business travelers. Okay, next. So we do not forget, right, that here can be like prices or rules or costs maybe, right?
But in the 1970s and 1980s, a few visionary people began to open the skies to the average American with low fares. Since 1938, the federal government had strictly regulated airline fares and routes.
So in this case, we think about regulated, right? Regulated fares and routes. But we have to wait until deregulated, right?
In 1978, President Jimmy Carter deregulated the airlines. Airlines could now choose their own routes and fares. Air traffic.
And in this case, you see that they actually could choose their routes and fares. Once you do not pay attention to this regulated and deregulated, of course, it will be perhaps a little bit difficult, right? Because whether you will think whether you have to write down fares and routes or routes and fares. In fact, this is very important that your answer has to be written in such a way. First, routes and fares. So only this is the correct answer. So pay attention to such kind of things again, right? They purposefully try to add some extra words and some unnecessary words and collocations so that you perhaps will be confused afterwards. So yeah, I think that we cope with this task perfectly. We can go further and we still have a couple of exercises. The rest of the exercises from this part of the handout that look like this, you will of course do at home. Of course, at the end of the class, I again will remind what you have to do and what you have to complete, right? So we are skipping this page as well. So again, in this case, I really would like to draw your attention to this exercise, especially because you as well have to complete the table in this case. In fact, you have to write down words or collocations in the spaces that are provided, but you have to be very careful with writing down as far as the text indeed is very academic. So this is about the experiments, the scientific experiments, and you have to be very careful with writing down and recognizing the correct words. But in fact, the principle according to which we work will be as well very similar to the previous task that we have done right now, for example, with these flights, with these passenger planes. So that's why I again leave it as a home task, as far as it really will take much time. So now we are going further, and actually the rest of the exercises will be analogical. Again, in this case, you as well have to write down some words. You have to complete the notes below. And the matching as well. Of course, we already practiced enough this matching type of exercise, so that's why we again are skipping this as well. And multiple choice, this was just several tasks ago. Of course, we're not going to repeat this once more. And now we actually are moving to the extracts from Collins. And actually, this is a good book for the beginners, especially IELTS Collins book. And this is the extracts from the listening part. So of course, we are going to skip some questions from the first section as far as they are too easy in my opinion. You can do them, of course, at home very easily. So now let's see what we are going to focus on this time. Once you can go to this page, when you see this section 3, questions 21, 23, we will try to write down the correct words again. Here we have to complete the notes below, and in fact, of course, we again have to be able to predict. So let's try again to see what we actually have to write down in this case. Of course, pay attention to the word limit, as usually we have to write down no more than 2 words and or a number. So 21st, presentation focus on some kind of animals, right? As far as you see that this is noun, of course, the word before the noun has to be an adjective, like wild animals perhaps, right? Or anything like this. In this case, I really would like to remind you that here the word will be perhaps unknown or perhaps quite complex, but please do not skip this. Do not think of this word for quite a long. You have to write down at least what you actually hear in this case, at least what you catch. Afterwards, you probably will think about the word itself, but please do not skip it anyways. Next, pros, like plus sides, plenty of something, of course, yeah, because we have this of preposition, plenty of something for presentation. For example, I can write down materials or something like this. At least I expect something very similar to this. And the next is difficult to, cons, minus sides or downsides, difficult to, maybe difficult to read or maybe difficult to understand, or difficult to research. Of course, it has to be a verb, definitely, right? So now let's see what we actually have for this task.
Hi, Katie. Hi, Ian. Come on in.
Hi, Professor Gordon. We wanted to talk to you about our wildlife presentation next week.
Have you decided how to organise it?
Yes, Professor. At first, we were going to focus on the cat family, but then we decided to talk about nocturnal animals instead.
Yes, good idea.
So you see that perhaps the word was not very easy to understand, but in fact it's nocturnal. This is the word that we can describe usually cats or some other animals that usually live or predate at night, so nocturnal. But of course you have to write down at least what you catch, nocturnal. But I have to say that usually they use very common words, and you are not supposed to know like specific definitions, maybe, right, from biology or anything like this. So next.
And how is your planning going?
It's going well. We think we have enough material for 20 minutes. The advantage is that there are so many...
So you see that material, of course, it perfectly suits actually this space, right? But the word material was given before the word pros, before the word plus sides, right? Let's listen to this extract again.
And how is your planning going?
It's going well. We think we have enough material for 20 minutes. The advantage...
So they say enough materials, and then only they go to this pros, the advantage. So that's why, of course, this was not that very sentence, this was not that very word, enough materials. So that's why we have to focus on another word, another sentence. The advantage is...
for 20 minutes. The advantage is that there are so many visual aids we can use.
Visual, and you of course can perhaps at least guess visual aids. It sounds as if it can be one word, but in fact there's other 2 words for the presentation. There are too many or plenty of visual aids. Let's listen to this.
Going well. We think we have enough material for 20 minutes. The advantage is that there are so many visual aids we can use. We found lots on the internet which we think will be really interesting for people.
The problem is that this
Of course, it is cons, right? Difficult.
topic has been hard to narrow down. If anything,
It was hard, like difficult, hard to narrow down. Of course, yeah, you are not supposed to write down this as far as we have this word difficult. So that's why I just skip this, and we have only to write down narrow down, like to make the topic narrow. Let's listen to this once more.
the problem is that this topic has been hard to narrow down. If anything,
So you see that in fact it all was not very difficult, but just the words and actually those collocations like visual aids or nocturnal not very common in fact. So that's why please do not panic. Write at least what you hear, write at least what you catch. And we are moving further. This will be the next part, the next second part of the same conversation. There will be 3 people talking, tutor, Katie and Ayan, and they will talk about the same topic about the presentation. So in this case, of course, as I told you already, which 4 ways, which 3 books, for example, this kind of task is a little bit difficult because you have to pick on your own whether it's A, B, C or B, D, E, for example, right? And again, as I told you already, this all is a little bit similar. So what we do, we actually try again to look through at least. So please read them carefully. And then afterwards, we of course will just write down, as we will take some notes, and we will of course focus on exactly what the tutor will say. This is very important because you see that which 3 ways does the tutor suggest Katie and Ian can improve their presentation. And even if, as far as here will be 3 people talking, as far as Katie and Ian, even if they will talk about something and they will mention some steps or some ways, you only have to write down those points that tutor really agrees with or the tutor really suggests. Okay, so now let's listen to the way it actually is presented in this case.
We've got too much information for just 20 minutes. How do you think we could narrow it down further?
It is a broad subject. There are a few ways you could do it, but I'd recommend just looking at a representative sample.
So you see that the first sentence that she says that I'd recommend. So in this case, I even will write down this I'd recommend because this actually shows this link towards the suggestion of a tutor. So I would recommend to focus on representative samples. Let's listen to this.
But I'd recommend just looking at a representative sample of nocturnal animals, just 4 or 5.
Yes, and maybe we could...
Write down at least this one. Afterwards we'll go back and of course we will analyze this, right?
Yes, and maybe we could choose one animal from each continent, or a land creature, a marine creature and a winged animal.
I like the idea of separating it by different types of animals, and if we limit the detail, we'll definitely have enough time.
But don't limit the detail too much. Also, think how you're going to interest the audience.
Well, we're going to have a picture for each animal so we can talk through the picture.
That's a nice idea, but...
So you see that actually, while they were talking about this, I just wrote like this Ian suggestion, like whether we can use, for example, one animal or land animal or marine animal. Then there was some suggestion of Katie, like Katie, right? We have to, for example, use some separate animals, or that we have to separate them. But you see that I cannot write down them as the correct options as far as I haven't heard any approval from the tutor's side. She did not say yes. She only, like tutor again, she said that please do not limit it. Try to interest the audience. Okay?
So we can talk through the picture.
That's a nice idea, but...
And you see that they actually say that we could talk through the picture, and the tutor actually says that this would be a nice idea. Of course, we have to write down those kind of approving words, saying that, meaning that she says like yes or yes, you could do it.
Don't limit yourself to pictures. If you can find any clips of the animals, use them. Showing brief video clips can keep an audience interested.
And you see that what she actually advises is also about clips. Okay, so next we are continuing.
I'll look on the internet tonight.
And think of questions to ask your audience. People like to be involved.
Yes, that's a great idea. Anyway, Professor, we've been practicing our presentation and we'd like to show you a small set.
So you see that even if there are so many people talking about these ways how to give the presentation, right, we only have to pay attention to the tutor's words as far as what are 3 ways that the tutor suggests. So she actually said that I'd recommend to use only representative samples, like only several of them, 4 or 5. She also says that do not limit, please interest the audience, please use and find clips. She said that about the pictures, it's okay, it's nice, but please, if you can, do and research and find out the clips and think about the questions. Those are the main ideas that actually the tutor suggested, right, as far as I had a chance to write down this all. So now let's see what kind of options do we have overall. So we have this do research on the internet. No, this is what Ian just thought about, like I will do in research on the internet. Limit the amount of detail within the presentation. No, teacher, in this case the tutor, said that do not limit yourself. That's why of course not B, definitely. Separate the presentation into clearer sections. This is what this girl actually suggested, like whether we have to separate, but we didn't hear any approval. Use some video clips. I think yes, this is what we can actually use, because there was something that tutor, the teacher, I don't know, advisor herself actually mentioned, right? Focus on only a selection of animals. Of course I can write down, because selection is like one part or one small group of animals, and this representative samples, only 4 or 5, actually is a good way to show those several animals or selection of animals. So that's why of course I can in this case now write down E. Make sure they practice the presentation. Nothing, I guess, was about this one. And think of some discussion questions. Of course I think it was the easiest way. So you see, so what you have to pay attention to is, please do not, I would say, confuse the voices of people in this case, right? Because of course there will be many options that Katie or Ian can give, or some other people can give. Sometimes there are 3, 4 people talking, because once the question is formulated as, for example, what tutor suggests, please write down only those things that in fact this tutor advises. So in this case my correct answers will be E, D and G. In fact, in such kind of cases, the order of the letters can be any. Of course you can write down DGE or GDE, but it's better to write down like according to the order. So once you of course see that D is correct, turned out to be correct, please write down D for this 24th. Next write down E for 25th, and write down G in this case, just in order to be sure. But in fact it's not very important. So the important fact is that actually all those 3 letters E, D, G in any order can be given here, can be written in this space. And I think that here we have as well to work with diagram a little bit. So here the point is that some words again can be not very clear to you perhaps. So we will try to recognize, to catch the word, as far as they again will very quickly mention those necessary words. So now let's try of course to see what kind of suggestions we have for those blank spaces. Flexible spine for taking. I don't know, maybe taking a victim or taking another animal. So at least I'm not really sure, but definitely it has to be a noun, right? So let me just again write down this for 27th. I expect some noun, but I do not even imagine what it can be, right? So next, for this 28th, yellow fur with black, I think that black circles or black some kind of spots, you see, maybe black and white spots. So definitely it has to be perhaps adjective, I think, with black and some kind of spots maybe. Next, 29. Dark rings on this part, maybe on tail part, maybe on, I don't know, some kind of part. Again, it has to be an adjective, right? And 30th, sharp and some kind of claws. Again, you see that this part of an animal is claw. Again, it has to be an adjective.
Track 38. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Well, we were thinking of presenting each animal with a picture and describing their physical characteristics.
Okay, but not in too much detail. That's just background information.
We'll start with the jaguar. I'll introduce it by saying that the jaguar is a nocturnal animal and the only species of the genus Panthera to be found in the Americas. Like any cat, it has whiskers and it can move quickly. Its spine has great movement, meaning a jaguar can take long strides.
You see that actually for taking long strides, yeah? In fact, of course, it cannot be very clear, but please, even if you do not understand this word well, try to write down at least what you hear, at least what you catch. Those strides means like steps or the distances that this jaguar can take, okay? So in this case, yeah, you have to write down these long strides. Next.
Sometimes up to 5.5 meters. This can make it a deadly predator, as you can imagine. Moving on to the fur, its fur is quite distinct. The markings are like black donut-shaped spots on its otherwise yellow fur.
So you see that in fact it was very difficult, for example, for many students, as far as I know. We have to write down donut-shaped. Of course, it's quite a distinct word, so not very commonly used, of course, right? Yellow fur with black donut-shaped spots. Of course, I think that you know the word donut, right? Like kind of biscuits that you can actually buy. And in fact, of course, you shall not expect such kind of very rare words, but in fact, sometimes, of course, you can meet them in such kind of text about maybe biology or some kind of diagrams, especially donut shape in this case.
People often confuse them with a leopard for this reason. Now, the tail is interesting. Although people think that the tail has stripes on it, the fur on the tail actually is similar to the body, with black circles around the lower section.
Black circles around the lower section. So you see that this formulation, of course, means that this is that very sentence as far as black circles is same as dark rings around on lower section. Section is similar to part, so that's why you only have to write on lower section, even if it was not pronounced very clearly. Let's listen to this again.
The fur on the tail actually is similar to the body, with black circles around the lower section.
Around the lower section. So in this case, you only have to write down lower. In this case, please do not write down there, even if you definitely hear this. As far as I told you that in diagrams, as far as this is the diagram, we are not interested in the context. We only have to complete, so that's why only lower will be correct. This is not the sentence to be completed. This is only the diagram, okay? So write down only lower part or lower section, right? And next, here has to be an adjective, right?
The jaguar is generally a creature to be feared. Oh yes, I should have mentioned this earlier. Sorry, like most cats, it has sharp, retractable claws.
So you see that actually the way you hear will be the correct way to write down the word. Retractable.
It has sharp, retractable claws.
You see that retractable, nothing really special is given in this case, right? So once you will skip because of being panic, of course, no one will count this as the correct answer. Write down at least what you hear, retractable. Do not get panic, of course. Actually, this was the last task for today. You see that still you have, of course, couple of other tasks to complete, but again, as I told you already, as far as you will scroll down this all those pages that we have mentioned today, that we have covered, but of course we did not work with every of these tasks. You just simply have to complete this all at home. Of course, the file will be attached to this file section, and you'll find out the answers for them. So please complete this all at home. And I think that we again revised very important things, and we again worked out those strategies that we usually use, that we mentioned and that we learned in the very first class, in the second class as well. So now I think that you understand the main strategies of the listening. So that's why I think that it was a very useful experience. Next class will be on writing part. See you there, and I really hope that you learned much from this listening section. Bye.